Hello and welcome to the We Win podcast, powered by Accelerate Her Africa in partnership with the Human Pattern Institute. You are also welcome. I'm your host, Lolita Ejiofor, and it's a pleasure to have you here with us today. Our next guest, she left Zimbabwe, then Rhodesia, at 11, hit rock bottom at 25, and spent the next 3 decades quietly figuring out the one thing most leaders never address: why people don't change and what it actually takes to help them to do so. Kerry-Lyn Stanton-Downes is a psychotherapist, TEDx speaker, founder of Be Relational, and the recent author of Beyond Words: How to Lead People from Survival to Success. She has spent 25 years pressure testing one powerful truth: the problems we face are relational, and so are the solutions. And today, as well as our conversation about Kerry-Lyn's work, she will also be answering your questions sent in by our incredible community on Instagram. Please help me welcome Kerry-Lyn. Hi, Kerry-Lyn. So glad you could join us today. How are you?
I'm really good and actually very excited about this. So thank you for inviting me.
Awesome. So Kerry-Lyn, let us start with you. Tell our listeners who you are and what you actually do with relationships.
What a lovely question. I spend my time supporting people understanding what it truly means to be relational. Because I find that a lot of people get into relationships but have no concept of what it means to be relational. So my role is to support people understanding what it means to be relational, irrespective of the context, whether that's in your personal life with a loved one, with friends, or with colleagues, bosses, employees, it doesn't matter, or society at large. So my role is purely supporting us learning something we're not taught in schools, at universities, and that was somehow expected to understand through osmosis, which just doesn't happen.
I think that's going to ring true with a lot of people because we're not exactly intentional with our relationships. And what we need to understand is that being relational is a key part of developing those relationships. So I'm going to hear more about this. I'm really keen. All right, so let us start somewhere I think every woman listening will recognize before we even finish the sentence. The woman who gives everything to everyone else and is last on her own list. She is the most given person in every room she walks into. And the person she gives least to is herself. Who is she? And what is that pattern actually costing her?
There are actually 2 parts to that question. And the first question that we need to look at is, what is our highest context marker? The second question is, what are we getting by holding that position? Now, for a lot of women, it's a learned, internalized, adaptive behavior that we've learned from generations before us.
Right.
But we need to stop and pause and ask ourselves a different question. As these generations, we have the freedom to ask a different question, which is, what's my highest context marker? If my highest context marker is be the good girl at all cost, then we're going to continue to give without really paying attention to what we get. But the get is in my highest context marker is be the good girl at all cost. Okay, because then I'm either accepted, I'm loved, I belong, I'm liked. It doesn't matter what it is, but we have to understand what that is. The second thing is, what is the gain that we get from being the person that walks into the room and is always available, who's always on, who can always give more, and who fails to pay attention to themselves? What are you actually getting from that? And we don't get the time, or we don't give ourselves permission to ask these questions. We never sit down. I don't remember my mum ever saying to me, ask yourself these 2 questions. It was make sure you look good, make sure that you show up and you actually behave well, make sure you go around and you make sure everybody's got what they need. And so I learned those. I didn't learn to ask these two questions. And I really believe when we ask these two questions, we change how we show up. And we therefore are just in the process of asking the two questions, paying attention to ourselves.
Wow, what you said hit different, because I'm going to speak as a firstborn. I was one of those that were manufactured to do those things and to think that way and never really ask myself those questions. And I feel like people like me do not take responsibility for not asking ourselves those questions, because it would tend to question what those context markers are.
You know, the question you're really walking around is, what am I fearing I will lose if I stop and ask myself those questions? I think as a firstborn, secondborn, it doesn't matter, but whichever female steps into that role, we have to ask, what do we believe we will lose if we give ourselves permission to ask those questions? And that's often what holds us and binds us to the pattern.
Yeah.
So when we ask questions, when we really ask the right questions, we have to know that we're risking. And can we live with the risk? I never say to somebody, you must do something. I always say to people, can you live with the risk of doing that? And that's what people like the firstborns need to ask is, what is the risk and are they willing to live with that? Because it could mean being separated out from loved ones, the end of relationships. It could mean being ostracized from communities. So we have to ask, because if we don't ask that question, then we actually ostracize ourselves, feel lonely, and then feel almost worse than when we were doing what we were doing. And so we have to really pay attention and go, am I willing to risk? And then there's a second question that we ask after we've asked that question, which is, if I'm not willing to risk, then the question becomes, what can this relationship hold? Can it hold difference? And then we go into a different process of finding out whether the relationship can grow and hold difference, and whether we can even risk asking for change to happen in the relationship, not just risk saying, I'm not going to do that anymore. But can this relationship hold difference and change?
You talked about the risk of leaving, of asking those questions, but what are the costs of staying?
Are you talking about if you stay in the space of continuing to?
Yes.
Absolutely, there's a cost. But here I think is the key, is that it moves from being something that we're expected to do to being a choice. Because the moment we ask the right question, we step into our agency. And when we have choice and we turn around and say, this is an active choice that I'm making to be in this relationship, we can actually regulate our own nervous systems and we can find peace and contentment to some degree in the space. Right. The cost may be that we don't go and become a fighter pilot, or we don't go and become a world champion skier, or we don't go and marry the person that we're truly in love with. We still have choice. And we can find a level of peace in the choice we made.
Right. Oh, completely understand that. Thank you. All right. You talk about the body keeping score of every relationship it has ever been in, that it knows when you are safe and when you are not before your brain has a chance to catch up. What do you mean by that? And why does it matter for how we show up with the people we love?
What we need to remember is our past votes loudly in the present. Let's think about that. The past votes loudly in the present. What do I mean by that? Every relationship we ever had is stored within our system. Exactly as you mentioned, we have a sense of that was safe, that was unsafe, that was friendly, that was threatening, that was kind, that was cruel. And so what happens is when we come into contact with something in the present, our nervous system is going back and it's going through all the filing cabinets we have, which are billions of filing cabinets. And it's going, this experience I'm having right here reminds me of that over there. So that's why the past votes loudly in the present.
Right.
And so without us choosing to actually really build our relational capacity, we start to behave according to what we have experienced.
Right.
And we're not really present. So imagine if I had been on a bus and I had had an experience where somebody had, with a red shirt and a blue cap and had a particular smell, pushed me as I got off the bus. In my brain and in my body, I store the smell, I store the color, I store the size of the person, right? I store the hat. And so every time I see something that looks like that or smells like that, my body moves into a survival state. Whereas the person coming towards me in the present could have a huge smile on their face and actually be wanting to help me pick up my groceries that have just fallen on the floor. But my system will jerk in anticipation. That's because we haven't processed what we hold at a cellular level. We haven't had what we call memory reconsolidation, which is a positive, corrective felt experience.
Right.
And so that's why we say the past votes loudly in the present.
Makes perfect sense. I mean, yeah, we're very good at storing experiences, which then guide our thinking and how we react to the next experience. So I totally get that now. Okay, so one of the most confronting things in your work is this idea that we are not one person in our relationships, that there is a version of us that shows up when we feel safe and a completely different version when we are not. And that people around us already know which one walks into the room before we do. What does that do to a woman when she hears that?
I'm going to answer that slightly differently. So let's go back to neuroscience. And let's go back to how our bodies function. Remember, the brain is a relational organ and we're relational by nature. We know that for a fact.
Right.
Now, what does that mean? It means that in any space, our systems are reading each other. So the heart emits a frequency up to 3 feet from the body. And so when we talk about somebody walking into a room, right, everybody in the room is emitting a frequency and everybody's frequency is reading your frequency.
Wow.
So it's looking for coherence in that frequency or incoherence. And that then tells a person whether it's safe or unsafe.
Right.
So that's why before we even walk into a room fully, we can walk in and go, oh, something feels really funny. Have you ever had that? I've had that so often. I go into a room and I think, oh, something's gone down here and I don't know what it is. Or that person came and had a chat with me and nothing they said was odd, but something felt really odd. Because my body, my heart, the frequency, my whole nervous system is constantly assessing, is this safe or is this unsafe?
Right.
Is this a place I can be myself or is it a place I can't be myself? Now we need to add a layer to that. When we walk into a room, very often we're walking into a room with people who know us, and therefore they make massive assumptions about us. So in a way, they assume we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and we set up the environment that we end up doing that.
Right.
Because we fail to pay attention to what's happening for me, what's happening for you, and what's happening in the space between us. So there's always something happening. It's about whether we're paying attention to what is happening. Otherwise, that's how we end up being pigeonholed. People are making assessments about us. We start behaving according to what we think is expected of us because we're failing to pay attention to what's happening for us.
It's very relatable. And I'm speaking in terms like a leader, where you show up in rooms and you know that there is something within you that it's saying, I need to suppress this person and show up as what people expect me to be rather than showing up as myself. And it just becomes this cycle of behavior that you even set yourself up to be that way. And it becomes so consistent.
There's an extra piece, if I may share, that I think is really important. Remember, people do one of three things to us when we decide to change. They either champion us and become our greatest supporters and go, yeah, go get it, right? And I love it, and yes, go be that. Or they withdraw. And the third thing they do is they attempt to get us to go back to doing what we used to do. And so when we walk into a room, even if I walk into a room of people I know and I choose to do something different, their nervous systems are having a response to that. And their memory that they have of me and how I behave is activated. And it doesn't mean they're going to relate to me according to who I am in that moment. They will relate to what they remember of me. And as you say, unless we then pay attention and become conscious of what's happening for me, what's happening for you, and what's happening in the space, then we get into this very odd dance of me trying to, show you who I am and who I'm becoming. And this person going, I can't relate to you, so I'm just going to keep relating to you as I've always related to you. And what's happening? This just doesn't make sense because nobody's talking about what's happening, right? We're not talking about what's happening for me, what's happening for you, and what's happening in the space. And I'm going to repeat that throughout this because I hope by the end of the podcast, it becomes so ingrained in the listener that they go, what does that really mean? And how do I do that?
Absolutely. I'm sure they will. You say the silence in our relationships is not neutral, that the conversations that never happen, the things we think but do not say, are actively shaping everything. What is actually being built in that silence?
100% silence is not neutral. It is telling us something about the relational space. It is telling us something about what can't be said. It's telling us about the thing that nobody wants to address. And it's telling us something about where our survival systems, nervous systems are at any given moment. The challenge is people don't know what to do with the silence. That's what I think is important about the question. Is if silence is not neutral, we have to ask, not just how do we get stuck there, but what do we do with the silence? And how do we move beyond the silence and start having the right conversations that actually talk about what the meaning is of the silence? And my hope is that we can go into more depth about that, or we can talk about that at another time.
Right. I would love to have talked about it, but it is a very strong statement there. Silence is not neutral. There is something that needs to be spoken about, a discussion that needs to be had. And it's what we do with that silence that really matters. Everything you have described today flows towards something you have named: regulate, relate, reconnect. We've been living those three words through this conversation without calling them that. Walk our listeners through what you mean by each one.
Sure, they're three very powerful words. They're very simple words, but they're genuinely words I wish I had learned many years ago. And I think they would have made my life a lot easier. And I'm hoping that the listener and people who read my book or listen to my TED Talk can really find some support on how to be in the world. Because let's start with the regulate. If you look at social media, it's awash with regulatory skills and tools and ways to help you regulate. And that's wonderful. And I absolutely applaud the fact that we are coming to understand what it means to regulate our nervous system. The biggest challenge is we forget that the regulation needs to be in service of something.
True.
The challenge is, at the moment in society, the way we're talking about it is, it's all about me. Now, what does regulation mean? It actually means the capacity to support our nervous system enough that we can then show up with presence, curiosity, and openness in this space in our relationships. So that's what regulate means. It's to really settle our own nervous system to help us become available and attuned in the space between us.
Right.
What does relate mean? It means building the relational capacity in order for us to repair when there are ruptures. One of the things I didn't learn growing up or in my 20s, and I only learned because I went back to study, and I've literally spent the last 25 years studying because I'm so curious about how we function, is the understanding that we've never had a language and a framework for understanding how to build our relational capacity, which is the ability to stay open, curious, and present, especially when it gets relationally hard. And it's why I developed the 8 principles. Now, in order to embody those 8 principles, we need to have regulated our nervous system.
Right.
So that we can reflect, we can be curious, we can navigate difference, we can hold a mindset of abundance, we can know what we're in service of, we can be vulnerable with each other, and we can engage in respectful candor. And then if we look at the reconnect, that's what I was sort of talking about when I talk about repair, in that we get into relationships and we leave so much of our relationships unspoken in the space between us because we don't know how to navigate difference.
Right. Yes.
We have no concept of how to engage with a rupture and how to repair. And when we build relational capacity, that ensures that the quality and the speed of our repair means that we reconnect. And that hopefully is a very short explanation of what it means to regulate, which is ourselves, to relate, which is what regulation is in service of, and building relational capacity so that we can reconnect.
Very clear. I fully understand the connection between all 3, but I'm going to push you a bit and let's look at the African context because, we're talking to a lot of African women today. We are already under the pressures from culture, religion, community. So there is kind of double the pressure on them to be a certain way, where being relational is masked by these obligations to those 3. So what would you say about that? How can we encourage our sisters in that space?
There are 2 things I believe that we can begin to do. The first is to support each other in regulation and really share tools and tips on how to do that.
Okay.
The second thing we can do is we can do amongst ourselves the things that we can't do with the rest of the community right now. We can learn together to build our relational capacity. We can actually repair when we rupture.
Right.
We can do it amongst ourselves so that our nervous systems know what it's like to have the other person there. Because even that act of doing it between ourselves prepares us to be able to cope with and manage what happens in society at large when we can't do that. Because we are being seen, we are being understood, we're being known, and we're being met with those close to us. And that, I believe, is the power of a community coming together to do this work together. Because we may go home and not be able to get that over there. But by being seen, felt, known, heard, and understood, we can go and do what we need to do over there. And then it becomes a choice.
Awesome. I love the emphasis on community, finding your tribe, because when you find that you are with people that you share the same challenges, you can have those conversations and repair together. I love that. Thank you. What does it actually mean to be relational? Because I think a lot of women will hear that and think it means being endlessly available, endlessly patient, endlessly giving, which is exactly where we started this conversation.
And my response to that is absolutely not. It is not about being endlessly available, endlessly beautiful, endlessly kind, endlessly empathic, endlessly tolerant. Doesn't mean any of that. What does it mean to be relational? This took me so long, Lolita, to understand. And I did so much research, and I had to find my own meaning of this, one that I believe has a greater possibility of helping people than most ways of looking at relationship. And to be relational means this. It means the capacity to pay attention to what's happening for me, what's happening for you, and what's happening in the space between us. That is what being relational means. And that's where the regulate, relate, reconnect sits. Because when I'm paying attention to what's happening for myself, so if you look at, I created a whole being triangle with thinking, sensing, emotion. When I pay attention to what's happening in my whole being, not just my thinking, then what I do is I give myself an opportunity to really settle and go, wow, that's what's happening to me in this situation. Then I can ask what's happening for you, because that's only one part of the equation. So to be relational is to be as deeply curious about myself as I am about the other person and what's happening for them. Not their thinking, but what's happening for them. So that's where we start to move conversations from content conversations to process-led conversations. Because what's happening for me is not a content-led. Content-led being, you said this, I said this. You said this, I said this. You said this, I defend this. I said this, you challenge that. You said something, I withdraw. I withdraw, you chase me. Does it make sense? Mm-hmm. That's not being relational. The being relational is the much deeper process-led conversation, which is, it's really interesting. When you share that, I notice I become scared. Or I notice that my heart rate goes up and I think, I wonder what he expects of me. Yeah. Or, can I really do that? What happens for you when I share that this is happening for me? Then the other person can say, I really didn't know that's what was going on for you. I thought you would just run with it and it would be fine. I'm really surprised. Then you get into the real conversation, and that's what being relational means. Paying attention to what matters, not just what's being said.
100%. You just made me think there, because a lot of the times we're having these conversations, we're not being relational because we're very quick to react to what that person is saying, and we're not thinking about what's happening to us or to that person. And it's a conscious effort, Kerry. It really is. Okay, so Kerry, we've been taking questions from our community on Instagram. So I have their questions for you to answer today.
Sure.
I'll start with the first one. I've been sleeping with a guy who lives near me for months. I found out he has a serious girlfriend. We never defined anything, but I'm in too deep to just walk away clean. And I don't know if to tell the girl, who I don't know, or just keep at it. Technically, I'm not hurting anyone.
So one of the things we'll probably find as we go through the questions you got from the audience is that often it might feel like I'm not answering the question because it's not the right question.
Right.
So often you'll find that in my answers, I will pose a different question so that we're actually paying attention to what needs to be paid attention to.
Right. Okay.
Because asking the question, I'm not technically hurting anyone, should I tell the girlfriend? Those aren't the right questions. The question underneath that is, who am I becoming by being in this relationship? Because when you ask that question, it's about you and your behavior and who you are. And that's what matters. That's what really matters. And there's also two pieces here which can't both be true, which is I'm not hurting somebody and I'm in too deep. Those two things don't really sit together. And so we have to move away from those statements and those questions and rather get curious about what keeps you choosing someone who's willing to give you less than you deserve.
Right. Very true. Very true. Okay, moving on to the next question. My best friend and I have been on and off for 3 years. He's comfortable where he is in life, never initiates anything more. And I think he is so freaking relaxed. And I keep comparing every man after him to a version of him that never actually shows up. But he's kind, loving, and caring. What should she do, Kerry?
For me, this doesn't feel like you're comparing this person to other men. It feels like you're grieving the relationship you hoped it would be rather than the relationship you're actually in. So we often fall in love with potential. And so it's less about whether he's kind, but it's about whether he's available for the relationship you want. And if we think about it, then the real question becomes, if nothing changed from today, would this be enough for me? So again, notice I'm asking a different question.
Yes, very well framed. Would this be enough for me? Very good question that you're asking her, Kerry. All right, so the next question. This is quite sensitive for me because his ego is quite fragile. My boyfriend doesn't know I make more money than him. I've been hiding promotions, downplaying bonuses, shrinking myself so he doesn't feel small. I don't know if to keep at it or just tell him. I'm scared and I love him.
Oh.
This is a tough one. And she put I love him in capital letters.
And I really feel the internal push-pull for this person. It feels very deep, very personal, and quite painful.
Yeah.
Actually. And again, this isn't about money. It's about whether the relationship can hold difference. It's whether the relationship can hold change. And what I'm hearing is that this person is afraid to find out whether the relationship can hold change. Because remember, if we go right back to what's the highest context marker, is that if they approach their partner and say, look, there's something I'd like to talk about and I'd like to explore with you, then they are already anticipating that their partner is going to do one of three things: champion them, withdraw from them, or try and get them to go back to being what they were, because it keeps them safe. So we always have to ask, what am I willing to risk? Because everything else becomes about managing their experience, which then confirms they have a right to think about you in the way that they are. We're not giving them the opportunity to actually know something more about ourselves. But we have to be willing to risk, Lolita, and that is a very scary thing for many people. And I have no judgment over people who choose not to risk. But then it becomes a choice. If you remember, we spoke earlier about then you have to claim agency around the choice you're making, because your highest context marker is stay in this relationship at all cost. If you're willing to risk, then I would say for conversations like that, it would be about asking questions like, who are we becoming? What do we know about each other? Can I offer a suggestion, something that I'd love your audience to try in their relationships? And I share this with all my couples. I say to them, do this, which is grab a bowl, grab a box, grab a baggie, I don't care, something nice. And I want each person, each partner, to write down at least 5 questions they want to ask to help them better know their partner. And then take each question, pop it in the baggie, and then once a week, sit down with your partner and pull a question out. And when you pull that question out, you ask the question and you both have to answer that question.
Right.
And if that feels safe, pull out another one. And if the relationship can only hold one question at a time because it's new or it's unusual or it's a bit scary, then also make sure that the questions you put in aren't the deepest questions you want to ask a person. So there might be questions like, what do you know about me now that's different to what you knew about me when you met me? That gives you an idea. Has this person kept up with who I am, or are they still framing me of who I was then? Because unless we ask those sorts of questions, we can't really see whether the relationship can hold the difference or move to a next level. Does that make sense?
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. I love the approach there because you have sort of like a gradated approach to dealing with these questions. So you start with the surface questions or the shallow questions and see how that goes down before you go deeper and deeper. And there's a sense of trust you're building as you go. So I think it's a really good approach. And I hope everyone was listening to that.
Absolutely. Right. I always say, we must remember that you've got two nervous systems. You don't want to put two nervous systems into survival state because then it becomes a fight. So you want to start by asking questions that allow the two of you to get to know each other, but aren't threatening to the space.
Right. Okay, next question. This is not about a man because I'm all about self-love, but I've achieved almost everything I said I wanted to 5 years ago, and I still feel like I'm waiting for my real life to start. Like this is somehow the practice round. I don't know what my problem is.
Here's how I'm going to answer this. There's nothing wrong with this person because this isn't a success issue. It's a relational issue. This practice round usually means that a person has built their life and they're standing in it without anyone truly witnessing it.
Right.
And that's a very lonely place.
Get it.
And we must remember that we're relational beings. So a milestone that no one has shared with us barely lands in our body because it's just not being mirrored to us at all. And so it feels empty, it feels lonely, it feels as if it has no meaning. So we need to ask a question that isn't about what next. It's rather, who's actually in this with me and seeing me? Now, that's the first part. The second part is, as human beings, we're often living in the future and we never inhabit the present. And I'd become curious about whether this person has learned how to be with themselves when there isn't another mountain to climb.
Very good question. Very good. All right. So the next question, I've been talking, quote unquote, to someone for 8 months. Sounds crazy. We've met each other's friends. He still introduces me as my person or something like that and not his girlfriend. Every time I bring up the title talk, he changes the subject so smoothly. I don't even notice until hours later. I mean, smoothly? Come on.
Yeah. So I don't think he's confused. I think he's just very comfortable. And he talks about you as his person because it gives him all the sense of closeness and none of the commitment. And, that smooth subject change is very practiced. And you're asking whether he'll define the relationship. I'd first ask, why are you accepting a relationship that isn't being defined?
Question.
Right? His avoidance is giving you information. Don't ignore it because you hope tomorrow will be different to today.
Yeah, definitely. I think he's just highly skilled at what he does. And I guess the question is, how much more is she willing to take?
The question is, what's happening for her that she's willing to continue to ignore this? Is it because she's hoping tomorrow will be different? What would happen for her if she accepted it wasn't going to be different? Then she'd have to make a choice. One of our biggest challenges is that we often sit doing the same thing because we don't want the consequences of choice.
Yep.
If she goes, tomorrow won't be different, then my question is, so what keeps you here? Well, then there'll be all sorts of answers like, well, then I'll be alone. Then I won't have somebody to tell me that I'm lovely or I'm beautiful. Then I won't have somebody to chat to, and I'll be reminded that I'm not in relationship like everybody else. And so we don't want to answer those questions. We don't want to make the choice about that. So we'd rather almost sit on the thorn and go, ow, it's hurting.
Yes. Okay. Next question. What are your thoughts on having a best friend that is not your partner? Because it is really bugging me.
So one of the things that we've come to create or think is appropriate is that our partner meets all our needs. As long as we've been alive as human beings, that's just not possible. But somehow we've come to think that that is how it should be. We've come to create these expectations of our partners. And so I think it's very healthy to have diverse relationships.
Right.
We obviously, if we're in an intimate relationship, we together have to identify what that intimacy means and therefore what we share with each other and what happens outside the space. That's for somebody to decide with their partner. But one person cannot carry every emotional, intellectual, and social need. That's just too much for our nervous systems to hold. You know, you and I were talking much earlier in this conversation about the woman who walks into a room and, you know, does everything. Her nervous system can't keep doing that. As a partner, I can't do that for my husband. I can't be everything to him because my system can't do that. And so for me, the question isn't whether you're allowed to have a best friend. It's whether that relationship strengthens your relationship with your partner.
Right.
So by being able to go and I have friends. And my question to me is always, how do those conversations, those relationships strengthen my relationship with my partner? That's what I'm more interested in. And so it's bugging me. It's because I can hear the longing to ask the right questions, but not knowing what the right questions are. And I'm hoping I've offered the right questions.
Yes. Okay, good. It's clear. All right, next question. I need help with my conscience. I cheated on my girl 2 years ago and only told my best friend. And we're still together and happy. I don't feel guilty anymore. And that scares me more than the guilt did because I want to marry her.
Okay.
Interesting.
So I work a lot with couples where there have been affairs, right? A lot of couples show up in my office because there's been an affair. And I always ask the same question, which was, what was happening in the space between you that it opened up to let somebody else in? And that's the thing this person needs to be asking. What opened up in the space between you that you took your attention somewhere else?
Right.
And you need to go back and work that out, either by yourself or with your partner. Now, I don't really think that holding secrets is a good thing. So my hope is that they build the foundation so that they can talk about what happened, that a space opened that somebody else could step into. Because then it doesn't become about blame and shame. It becomes about their relationship. The other person is just this ancillary thing that happened over there. Now, if it's a repeated pattern and the person has some kind of an addiction, then that's something different, right? Or if they culturally believe it's their right to have as many relationships as they like without telling their partner. But the key here is to go back to the partner and say, let's talk about the space between us.
Right.
Can we be ourselves in the space between us? Can we reveal ourselves? Are we getting our needs met? Is there something that we failed to talk about because we're afraid? And then from there, you can talk about how something stepped into the space between you, because by then you've created the foundation and the safety to have that conversation. You know, but it sounds like this is a relationship worth working on. If you want to marry somebody, it means you have a depth of feeling for them that's powerful. And that's where I go back to, you know, what are you willing to risk to actually really have this relationship for the next 40 years? Because it's not silence.
Yeah. There is some work to do there, exploring that gap. Okay, so next question. I am very happy with my girlfriend, but there is a couple we like on TikTok that we both really love. However, I keep comparing my completely normal relationship to them, and I genuinely can't tell anymore if my actual relationship has problems. She's amazing, but I don't even know how to explain it.
You know, the first thing I'd say is get off TikTok because you're holding your real relationship up against a 60-second edit for reach, for audience. And that's never a fair fight. So the problem isn't your relationship, it's your measuring stick that you're using for your relationship. So instead of, are we like them, ask yourself 3 better questions, which is, when we're together, do I feel safe? Can I be myself? Can I repair when something goes wrong? Because those tell you more about a relationship than anything you're going to see on TikTok. And I really want to say that comparison is one of the quickest ways to create relational poverty in your own relationship, because you're comparing your lived relationship with someone else's edited performance.
Yes. Get off TikTok. Okay. Next question. 5 years ago, I was in a relationship that everyone else in my family thought was stable. But he really used to hit me, cheat, and engaged in substance abuse. My mother still asks about him. I don't know how to explain that stable and right were never the same thing to them, but I miss him sometimes. Oh, so sad.
Gosh, I really felt that one. You know, I want to say firstly to whoever this person is, that for me is an example of courage. Saying that aloud, that you're missing them, doesn't mean that you're wrong or weak. It just means that it had meaning for you in a way nobody else understands. And so your nervous system still holds meaning that maybe hasn't been processed yet. And it's your body's way of remembering what was familiar. It isn't a verdict about whether he was safe or not. You know, stable and safe are not the same thing. What your family saw was something on the surface, but this person lived the reality, and you don't owe them a full account of that. Does that make sense? There's no need to have to go and explain that to them. And for me, it's more about if they got help, my hope is that they got support, real support, where they could go and work this through and process it, because they're unable to work it through with their loved ones and their family, because their family will never understand their experience. And so for me, it's really important to go and get good therapeutic support. And then I would be asking the family a very different question once you're a good way through the support, which is, can you tell me what happens for you that you need to keep asking me about him?
Right. Yeah, very good question. And courage does come into that. All right, so the next question. I recently moved from Nigeria to the UK, and I must say I am very lonely. I didn't think it would be this bad. I have friends back home though, but I feel neglected and out of the picture because of the distance. My 2 best friends send snaps when they hang out, but that just makes my chest hurt to see it. Aww.
You know, this is such an important one, because the first thing I want to say is your chest pain when you see the snaps is real. Because it tells you that you hold those friendships, the tiny daily moments that settle your nervous system without you noticing. And now it's reaching for people who aren't there in the room. You're seeing it in photographs, but you can't touch it. You can't experience it. And so what it does is it identifies the meaning and the missing and the loneliness. And that is very common. I mean, you know, I left my home country and came over here. And I have to say the first couple of years were the darkest years of my life.
Wow.
Because loneliness isn't simply the absence of people. It's the absence of being known. And so those chest pains are genuinely the grieving for those everyday moments of connection that helped you regulate and feel seen. So, you know, for me, it's about really reaching out to community and asking people to support you in finding people in the UK that can start to offer you those regulatory moments where your system doesn't feel so lonely.
Yeah.
And, I would hope that there is a community that you can reach out to and say, I feel lonely. Could somebody meet me for a coffee? I'm really struggling. Is there anybody in this area that would like to go to an art exhibition with me? Start finding ways to reach out to people in the environment you're in, because otherwise what happens is that loneliness compounds because you keep seeing what your heart yearns for. You need to start creating experiences and moments of being seen and known in the here and now, in the present, in this environment. And that's hard because you're not reducing the meaning of what you have, but you're having to create something new. And that in itself creates a bit of a distance between you and those that you've been with. And so we don't know in our systems, how do we hold on to those tightly to know they have meaning? But how do we also then create something new that helps us with who we're becoming and where we are at this moment in the world? And so I really long for this person, reach out, right? Find a community. If you belong to a church, find the church, go to an event, start talking to people. It'll be really important for your nervous system right now.
Everything you said just points to human being social, and community is where she'll find strength. All right, so our final question. I found out my partner has been sending money to his ex to help her out for the past 6 months without telling me. He says it's not romantic. I don't know if I believe him about the romance, but even without it, I still feel betrayed. I am very upset, but he keeps saying I'm doing too much.
Okay, I think I got that one. And what's important to name here is that this isn't about money, and it isn't even about the ex. It's about your choice having been removed in the decision.
Yes.
In the decision around what happens relationally. And that's the important thing, because we must remember, trust rarely breaks in one dramatic moment. It breaks when someone quietly removes your chances to say something that affects both of you. Whether that's romantic or not, it's still an injury to the relational space. Right? And him saying you're doing too much is him moving his own discomfort onto you. It gives him permission to not address what was really needing to be addressed. It's an excuse.
Yeah.
It's an excuse for not coming to you and saying, I'm thinking about giving my ex some money because she's struggling. How would you feel about that? And you beginning to talk about, because I make up, if you could make sense of why he was giving that person money, if you were by nature kind, generous, empathic, and your relationship could financially support that, there's a good chance you'd give the money. It's the fact that choice was taken away and he didn't believe that the relational space could hold that.
Yes.
That's where the challenge is.
Yes, I agree. And definitely the choice was taken away. And there needs to be a conversation around that so that it's clear why he is giving her money. So that conversation is long overdue.
Well, it goes back to what we spoke about right at the beginning. What's her highest context marker? What's she willing to risk? And if we look at what this relationship needs, remember one of the questions you were asking me much earlier about silence. Silence isn't neutral. His silence was not neutral. His silence was saying, I'm afraid to bring this to the relational space and have the conversation with you. Either because you're going to say no, or secondly, because I want to be in control of what I do and I don't want to really think that I have to consider you.
Yeah.
And so my question is, if he's willing to go into therapy, get into good couples therapy where you can have somebody facilitate this conversation. But if this person is going to go and ask their partner any question, the only question I would ask the partner is, what was happening for you that you didn't feel safe to bring that question to me?
Yeah.
Because it's not a blaming and shame. Remember what I said, we have to ask what's happening for me, what's happening for you, what's happening in the space. It's not that he gave the person money. It's the fact that he didn't feel safe to come and talk to her about it for whatever reason. But that's the only conversation to be had.
Yeah, I agree with you. Wow, Kerry, we've gone through all the questions that were sent in to us, and thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your thoughts. So to wrap this up, one woman is listening to this right now. She has recognized herself somewhere in what we've talked about today. What is the one thing you would ask her to try before she goes to sleep tonight?
Wow. What's the one thing I would ask her to do before she goes to sleep tonight? Can I have two things?
Of course.
Okay. The first is I would invite her to draw up a gratitude list. And not a gratuitous gratitude list, a real gratitude list. Things that she was grateful for. And when I say that, I'm talking about things she was grateful for that she was willing to do for herself. So that's the first thing. The second thing that I would invite her to do is to write down all the places she felt she couldn't be herself. And to ask herself, what happened? What happened? You know, people will say, do breath work, do a daily journal before you go to sleep. I'm like, no, ask yourself that question. Because that question gets us to look at a much deeper level of what's happening for us. And it links to what I was talking about, what it means to be relational. What was happening for me that I couldn't be myself? When I write those questions down and I answer those questions, then I can start to be curious about what's getting in the way. What am I not willing to risk? And what's my highest context marker? Do you remember that's where we started this conversation? And that's what it allows us to do. And every day, just, I say to people, just do that for a week and see what comes up.
Right.
Because suddenly you'll see patterns that you didn't really realize or you weren't really willing to face.
Wow. I'm sure that landed 100%. It actually creates room for self-introspection, and that is just deeply, deeply felt. Kerry, thank you so much for joining us here today. I hope you enjoyed it.
I've absolutely loved it. And my hope is that every person who listens to this takes away just one or two things that they can do immediately. And that actually they give themselves the opportunity to listen to it more than once. Because what I find is we listen to something and we take the thing we need at that moment. But when we integrate that thing, when we re-listen to something, we take the next thing that we need. And I would also say that if people come up with questions, let them share them with us and we can do another, time together where we answer the questions that come as a result of us answering the questions.
That makes perfect sense. Yes. Well, thank you for making yourself available to that, Kerry. Thank you.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for every minute of this and for inviting me into the space where hopefully we can help so many women out there.
Wow. Kerry has given us a lot of information that people pay to hear. We need to decide whether in a relationship it can hold difference and change. And what is it that is going on with us? And what is going on with the next person? Being relational is about understanding that. So I'm hoping that as we walk away, as we continue in our communities and how we relate to people, that Kerry has given you the tools to understand yourself better and how to be more relational. I'd like to say thanks again for joining us and for being such a great audience. Until the next episode. Goodbye.